to Auburn Community Television and this episode of Meet the Artist. Today we are visiting David Crosby, who is a photographer. He is a member of the North Auburn Artist, and North Auburn Artist supports Meet the Artist. I'm so thrilled that we can be visiting with David today because I absolutely love photography, and I'm really looking forward to this particular visit because we are visiting his studio, and he is going to share with us his perspective through the lens. David, thank you so very much for having us here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's start out with what led you to pick up that camera and start seeing the world through a lens?
Well, I was working for a utility and I was taking industrial shots of pipes going in and things like that. And it was with one of the earliest digital cameras. And when I got back to the office and put it into the computer and realized that I didn't need a darkroom, I thought, well, this is really neat. So I thought, when I retire, I'm gonna take up photography. But at the time, I was doing a lot of brochures, I was doing budget reports and things like that. So I started Crosby Graphics when I retired, and I was doing mostly graphic work. But I realized I'm still working for a boss when I do that, because the client is the boss. And I didn't want to have a boss anymore, so I got in, and I really love photography, so I got in strictly to the photography as art field.
So did you take any courses at that time, or is it just all self-taught?
Well, the photography itself was pretty much self-taught. I subscribed to a lot of magazines, popular photography and such, and absorbed as much as I could. But I quickly realized that there's a lot more to photography than clicking the lens. The developing of it and working with RAW files as opposed to JPEG meant that I had to learn how to develop my photos. So I went back to school, took 3 semesters at Sierra College, and actually I could have spent years taking courses there because there's so much to know. But so I use Photoshop mostly, and I use maybe 10% of Photoshop to do what I need to do.
So when you talk about, what's the difference between JPEG and RAW?
RAW files. A JPEG is you let the camera decide what you're going to see. It will condense it. It throws out pixels. It looks at the picture and says, well, I don't need these pixels to get this picture. I can get rid of those. And it throws them out. And so you're letting the camera decide. On a RAW photo, it doesn't throw anything out. It absorbs all the pixels, keeps them there, and you decide when you start developing it, which is, by the way, the same way that they developed it in the darkroom. Same tools, same names, only now you're doing it digitally. And so you have the ability to control every aspect of that photo. So if you shoot a little too dark, when you bring up the light, you don't lose, you have all the pixels there, and you can bring it up without getting grain introduced and things like that, like you would have in a JPEG.
Now again, is this something that you do on your camera to do that, shoot in a RAW footage?
Right, you set the camera to a RAW, and it will, when you see the picture on the camera itself, it makes a little JPEG for you so you can see it, because a RAW file is not a photo, it is data. And you have to take it into the computer and convert it from that data into a digital negative. And then that digital negative you develop.
Wow, okay. I guess I'm very basic because I'm basically a point and shoot. So now, what was your first camera then?
My first camera, well, the very first one I shot was a little 3 megapixel. It was an Olympus point and shoot type thing. It had a zoom on it, and that's what I used for when I was working for the utility. But my first camera for me to shoot for art type things was a Minolta Damage A2 electronic viewfinder, which is a mirrorless type camera. Now they call them mirrorless.
Now, was this a 35 millimeter or was it a digital?
It was a digital, and it was not considered SLR because it wasn't like through the lens. You're looking at an electronic image of what the lens is seeing, which now today they call mirrorless, and they've gone kind of full circle back to that because the mirror won't introduce camera shake, so they've gone to electronic viewfinders on almost all the brand new cameras. But at the time that I got it, it was considered an enthusiast camera, and I wanted to get a professional camera, so I went to a Canon 5D, which has a mirror and is a digital SLR. But it's a full frame, and it shoots very nice pictures. But it's heavy and cumbersome. So, and I do a lot of my shooting with smaller equipment because I do a lot of traveling on motorcycle to the Four Corners and all around the West. And so I take smaller cameras. Some of them are that will shoot raw, some of them don't. So I have to work with JPEG sometimes. So it's different.
Well, that's one of the things I love about watching or looking at your photography is because I feel like I get to take some of those trips that you
Yes,
go on.
yes.
Because you certainly do capture those moments. So when you're driving along on your motorcycle, which I think is probably great, you just get to pull over and take that
I
shot.
shoot from the side of the road, quick shots. I'm kind of an opportunist. I mean, like Ansel Adams would say, oh, you have to visualize everything. You have to plan the whole thing out and set up and wait for the light. Well, when I'm traveling on a motorcycle, I don't have that luxury. And if I'm lucky, it had rained recently because then usually there's better colors and there's clouds and things like that. So I'm shooting from the side of the road and kind of just off the cuff. And I don't believe in the shotgun technique of just shooting everything and hoping for the best. I compose it and think about it and try to get the best shot I can. But I usually don't go walking big distances or anything because I'm traveling. I mean, I travel. I went 5,600 miles in 14 days on a motorcycle. That's a lot of traveling, but I shot a lot of frames.
Well, let's start looking at some of your photographs since we're talking about your motorcycle trip. This 5,600 miles, was this the one that you just recently took?
No, the one I recently
Okay.
took was the Blue Ridge Parkway. That was 2,000 miles on a motorcycle. I trucked my motorcycle to Kentucky and Cave City, and then I got out of the truck and I got on a motorcycle and drove through the Smoky Mountain National Park, Blue Ridge Parkway to Shenandoah National Park. And I took different pictures. This is it's called, well, it's on Blue Ridge Parkway. It's called Balsam Drive. Balsam Drive. Yeah, and these frames, I like these frames because there's nothing to them. They're very modern, sleek-looking frames, but there's no matting. There's nothing. They're front-loading frames, and they make the picture pop. I've had a lot of nice comments on these frames, and so I've gone to using them quite often. Although I do a lot of matting and things like that. And one of my favorites in Tennessee.
I just love the clouds in this one. It's absolutely beautiful. Now this is again while you're just tooling down the road.
Tooling down the road, I see something out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I have to turn around to get back and get the angle. I may have to walk 100 yards or so to get the angle that I want because I don't just randomly shoot. I do try to do a little bit of setup, but it's all handheld. I don't use a tripod when I'm on a motorcycle usually. So.
And that's actually hard to do and not move that camera.
Yeah, but you learn to be steady, and it's just like, well, I was in the military. It's like shooting a weapon. You take a deep breath, let it halfway out, hold, shoot, and let the rest of the breath out. So you're steady.
I never thought about doing it that way.
Yeah, it's just like shooting a gun, but you're shooting a camera, which is much safer.
Yes, definitely. So do we have any more from that particular trip?
We do. We have the York Mill.
And I love this one. I love the reflections that you caught in the water on here. It's absolutely beautiful.
And these are all going to be in a show that you know, of course. And then we went to Italy on a recent trip, and I shot the Dolomites, which are very distinct mountains, very different color. It's made of dolomite instead of granite, so it's they're really spectacular, and they're in your face because there's not any big foothills in the way. You're just right there with the big mountains. And then one of my favorites is the Grand Canal in Venice. The colors came out great. It was right after a rain. I was hoping for better clouds, but actually the lighting came out pretty good.
Okay, but this wasn't on your motorcycle
No,
trip.
this was on the trip to Italy.
I know, and you were posting photographs that you were taking on Facebook from that one.
Yes.
And they were absolutely gorgeous. And then you came back and said, well, those aren't even with your super camera.
No, well, most of that, the Grand Canal, I think, was with my 5D, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look at. I have the data on the pictures, of course, when I bring them up, and I can tell because I have to know which camera I took it with. Because if I took it with a little tiny handheld, then I can't only blow it up so big. So I need to remember what camera I took it with.
Now, how many pixels does your larger camera have?
I think it's 21 megapixels. But my Minolta, the one I started with, was 8 megapixel, and I can get pretty good sized picture out of that. But I have actually blown up pictures from my cell phone that came out pretty nice.
It is surprising that some of the cell phone photographs are really clear.
I've gone up to 11 by 17 with a cell phone. So,
That's pretty good.
yeah. I mean, you can do more if you have the software to introduce what they call interpolation, and it will bring in more pixels for you. It clones other pixels next to it and then brings them in and gives it a denser look so that you're not so pixelated when you blow it up. But I don't usually do that. I usually just take my cell phone pictures only so big.
Now, you had mentioned that you're going to be showing your artwork, the photographs here, at a show that's coming up.
Yes.
What show is that going to be?
Well, I'll be showing at Tango Yogurt, right down in the square in Auburn. I'm going to be showing at Hacker Lab, and I think that's in Rockland. And then Blue Line Gallery, I'll be showing there, that's in
May.
In May, yeah. So, yeah, those shows. And there's a couple other shows coming up in they're in restaurants and stuff down in the Rockland, Roseville area, and I haven't decided whether I'm going to do them yet or not, but I'm going to see about those.
I always figure I have to be in shows because I don't have enough wall space to put everything.
Yeah.
I always hate it when I take a show down and now I've got all of this artwork that's just leaning up against the walls because I have no place to put it.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay, I need to get another show up and going.
Yeah. My house is kind of like a gallery because almost 90% of the pictures that are hung downstairs in the bedrooms everywhere, it's my work. So I enjoy my work.
Well, and it makes an enjoyable tour through your house too.
Yeah, it does. It makes for good conversation too.
Now, some of the things that I'm fascinated by your work is because you mount it, or what's the appropriate word for that?
The matting?
Matting, the different ways that you do that.
Yes, I have a mat cutter here, so I do all my own printing up to 22 by 17. But anything bigger than that I have to send out. But when I do the smaller stuff, I have traditional paper mat, and I can make my own mats. But I also got into, because of my graphics background, I got into digital matting, which, as you can see here, this is all digital. It's flat. There's no matting involved.
That's amazing.
And if people don't like that, they can just mat over it or frame over it. So. Yeah, and you put shadow and do all this thing to make it look. And when it's hanging on a wall, for people, they'll never know.
You can't tell, and I really like that because honestly, matting is very expensive.
And this one, kind of warpy. It's just a real simple type mat with just this one line on it.
Well, while we have this one here, I was particularly taken with this because of the detail and the water that you caught. And you said this was just out here on
it was on my deck right back there after a rain, and I saw the drops of water, and I thought, no, that'd make a good shot, so I got it.
Now, did you set that one up and actually have a tripod and do all of that before you took that?
No, that was so long ago, I can't remember, but I think it was handheld. So, and I'm trying to remember, I can't remember what camera it was with. I'd have to go on the computer to determine that. But, yeah, I think it was handheld. Again, light was changing too fast, and it was right on those drops, and you have to act fast. I mean, the thing about photography, it's all in the timing of the light. Photography is nothing but gathering light. I mean, you can make almost any subject look beautiful if you have the right light. And that is a fleeting moment. You don't have long to capture it. Unless you're doing a planned shot where you have a tripod set up on a subject and you're waiting for the light. Other than that, you got to act fast.
That's one of the things that is nice too about digital, though, because you can take several of the same shot and then do the comparisons and decide which one that actually looks the best of them.
Exactly, and you can do multiple exposures and do high dynamic range things, so that you can take 3 or 4 or 5 exposures of the same thing, combine them in the computer, and you can tone down the highlights, you can bring up the dark areas, and you can do what they call high dynamic range, and it's more like what your eye sees. Camera cannot see like your eye. You can look at a subject with your eye and see into the shadows and see into the brights all at the same time. The eye is amazing, but they haven't developed a lens that can do that yet, only to a certain degree. So they take multiple exposures and then you combine them, and they have cameras now that do it in camera, but perhaps not as well as if you do it yourself manually.
And this is what you do on your computer.
I do.
You overlay the photos to get that.
Right.
Does it add more depth to it? Is that what it's doing?
It does. It adds wider gamut of color and light. But I don't do that much high dynamic range. I do a lot of just single shots, but I have done high dynamic range. I don't have a picture here right now, but like at the courthouse in Auburn, I think you've seen that one before, and other things. It's fun, but it's tricky. You can overdo it and make it look pretty fake. So, or you can overdo it and make it really arty. So it's all in the eye of the beholder as far as what you want to do with it. I'm more of a realist type shooter. But I know people who will take it and really manipulate it, but they come up with some beautiful, beautiful art.
Yeah, and certainly changing shapes and the coloring and where the emphasis is in some of those photos is what can be done through the computer as well.
Yeah, and the whole texture of the photo.
Yes.
Yeah, can be changed, can be manipulated. You can do, and people say, "Oh, you're cheating." Well, wait a minute. I mean, you don't go to Rembrandt and say, "Hey, that pigment color, it's not natural. You're cheating on that." Well, hey, come on, it's art.
You didn't grind them yourself.
Yeah, you didn't grind those paints yourself. Well, art is art. We're not shooting for newspapers here. At least, I mean, sometimes we are, but I'm doing art. So, but I'm mostly a realist. I try not to manipulate things too much. And if I do a composite image, like put a moon in something, I usually will label that as a composite. But does it really make any difference? A lot of people say, "Did it really look like that?" Who cares? It's art. But I am more or less a realist. And the other thing that people always say, "Well, what camera? You must have a very good camera." It's not the camera. I mean, a good camera helps, but if you ate a good meal, do you say to the chef, "Oh, you must have a great pan"? No. It's how you use the tool. It's the composition. It's how you develop the photo. It's all these things combined. And I've taken pictures like with a cell phone or a credit card size camera. They've come out beautiful. It's just as beautiful as when I use my big 5D. So it's not the camera, although a good camera does help. You can't. A good shot is your final product is only going to be as good as the beginning shot of your photo. I mean, you can only develop it so much to make it look nice. If you start off with something good, you're going to end up with something good. If you start off with something like, especially that's out of focus, it's almost no saving it. But now they have cameras that will take several different focusing points. By this, I mean several different shots, so that you can focus it post-process. I haven't used it yet.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because nothing is more exasperating for me is when I come back and I realize that something's out of focus. And what I was trying to actually emphasize in it didn't come out at all.
I know. And camera shake, or somebody moves, or you just have the wrong focus point. It's you're using the wrong ISO, a film speed or something like that. It's just, especially shooting indoors, you can get a lot of things out of focus that you thought were in focus, but when you bring them up on a computer, it's disappointing. And you can't fix it.
My biggest advancement when I went to get a new camera was I went to the full frame camera. And I didn't realize how much in a lot of cameras they actually cut out when they take that photo.
Right.
Until I got the full frame. And then one of the other things I liked about it was that because it's taking the whole thing, it pulls in more light.
Yeah.
And I never have to worry about, flashes and extra lighting for it.
Right.
And so I've actually enjoyed my full frame a great deal. And now I'm wondering, how could I ever go back knowing that I'm losing most of what I'm seeing? And
you bring up a good point, too, because the full frame gives you more. A lot of art is done in the cropping phase, too, and how you're going to crop it, if you're going to crop it at all. So it gives you all these pixels to work with the full frame, and it's just and like I said, you're seeing in your camera what you're going to see in the final product. So, but a lot of times art is created by severely cropping into something, So it's a fun thing, photography, art in general, but. I really love when I can. Sometimes I have a picture and it's just not quite right, and then I'll crop it a certain way, and now it's perfect. So yeah, it's nice.
Well, one of the things too that I do notice is that you definitely have an artistic eye. So when you say is that it takes, you need to have that to take really good photos. I think.
Yes, you can go to school and study all this stuff, and it helps, but you have to start with being able to compose a picture. And knowing, what makes a good composition. there's the rule of thirds and all these other rules, but also you have to realize that rules are made to be broken, because I've shot things dead center and they were meant to be that way. They weren't meant to be in a rule of thirds type thing. And yeah, so, you know, you can't go, and backlighting, sometimes people say, oh, you don't want to, you know, take pictures of things with backlighting. Well, baloney. I mean, sometimes you want backlighting. Sometimes you use a high f-stop and you can get that star effect from behind. It's really great. You know, it comes out really good. So there are rules, and generally you want to follow them, but also you want to look for the opportunity to break those rules to get the art that you want. You know, because sometimes when you break a rule in the right environment, it just comes out great.
Is there ever any time then when you look at something you go, oh my gosh, I took that?
Yeah, there's sometimes I get that, you know. Well, there's a picture up there of the Sierra Buttes, and it was funny. I was staying in Sierra City, and I went outside and I had a cup of coffee, and I tilted my head back to get this cup of coffee, and I saw the Buttes, and the sun was perfect. Clouds were going through there and everything, and I ran inside my cabin, and I told my wife, I'll be right back, and I threw everything with a tripod in my car and ran up to Sand Pond just below there and shot this shot, and with my Minolta A2 and my early camera, and it came out so good. I just went, I can't believe that. I'm an artist. That's when I realized, hey, I feel like an artist. I actually got a shot here that's very arty. And another time I shot a buffalo.
Before you go into that, let's show our audience the Sierra Buttes. Is that
Sierra Buttes?
Yes, let's show them that.
Well, I have to go get it.
Okay.
So this is the Sierra Buttes, and I took this on my 30th wedding anniversary, actually. So let me see. I was married in '77, so I had 30 years of that, and that's when I took this picture. And it came out really, really great. And you know, I could lighten the bottom of it. I could change the lighting in it, and so you get so it's not so hidden. But I like the mood that it sets. And a lot of my earlier work, I kept it dark because I like the Renaissance type mood that it sets. But so you can lighten things like this, but it kind of adds the mystery to it.
I love that one because yes, the light is just so amazing in the way you've captured the clouds. And you're right about having it a little bit dark because you can see just I think you see more movement in it.
Yeah. A lot of that brings up a good point. If you're going to, especially for people who aren't really familiar with photography and want to get into it, it's always better if you shoot it a little bit dark, especially if you're shooting raw. Shoot it a little bit dark because you can always lighten it and get into the shadows and stuff. If you overexpose it, it's very hard to fix that. Underexposure is much easier to fix than overexposure. So if you do make a mistake, make it on the dark side.
Now, when you're driving along, or even when you're looking at things and selecting shots to take, do you think in terms of how big you want to go with that particular image, or? Not
usually how big I go with it, but when I'm looking at things, I'm looking at them in a frame. I'm seeing them as the camera would see them. I'm composing as I go. I'm just constantly scanning for a composition and an angle, low, high, oblique, or whatever. A lot of times people say, well, that picture is not level. Well, I have a leveling device in my camera. I can actually see it. And it's level, but I'm shooting it at such an angle that it all of a sudden doesn't look all that level. And I can fix that. If it's too distracting, you can fix that in Photoshop. But a lot of times I like that kind of oblique or kind of off angle type thing. It kind of adds interest sometimes.
Well, it's funny when you're talking about getting things so that the angles. I had a friend who took a picture in Spain, and I absolutely loved it. And so I asked her if I could do a painting from it. And she goes, sure, but you're going to find that I've shot it. Somehow I got the tower that it's leaning the wrong way. And I'm thinking, okay, well, when you draw something, you can always fix that.
Straighten it out.
And so I'm drawing it, and I'm looking at the angles and stuff, and I'm going, but all the other angles are right in this photograph.
Yes.
So something's really wrong here. I went ahead and kept doing it, and then after I finished it all up, I stood back and I go, I did the same thing she did in taking this picture. I finally went and I started looking up this particular building. That building leans. So all of this trouble of me trying to figure out why it's not squaring up.
Yeah. And then, different lenses, especially when you're shooting in wide angle, it will introduce, pin cushioning or other leaning and things like that. And sometimes it's so obvious and so distracting that you have to take it out using software, and you can do that. But you have to be careful of not overdoing it too. I know a lot of times when I shoot weddings, which I have done also, and I usually take a 16 millimeter lens on with my 5D camera, and it's a pretty wide angle lens. And I take that because you're in tight quarters and you can get everything, but then people's heads and the edges are all deformed, so I have to fix that in Photoshop. I also like to take the 16 millimeter to Europe because I'm in these tight quarters and these squares and things, and there's just fantastic architecture. And the only way you're going to get it is with a wide millimeter, so
Yes.
you have to straighten them out when you get them back.
Yes. That is so exasperating sometimes for me, is that you can see this shot and then trying to figure out how do I get the shot that I want.
Right.
So there's times when I even feel like, though, that that's where the camera even limits it. So I guess that's where you're saying it doesn't emulate completely what we're doing with our own eye.
No, not at all. But that's what makes it fun, because you learn how to compensate or how to adjust it in software to make it come out the way you want. And a lot of people think, well, I don't know about all this tricky Photoshop stuff. Well, that's actually not. It's the same thing they did way back when. Ansel Adams. I looked at his contact prints before he ever developed them. And, people say, well, did it really look like that? If you look at Ansel Adams things, a masterpiece of his Yosemite or something, nothing in nature looks like that. I mean, it's a stark black and white. It's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful art. But he may have spent as much as 8 hours on that one picture, manipulating it with the chemicals. We do the same thing on Photoshop, using the same terms and everything else. It's just done digitally.
That's a good point, because I too hear that often, is that, well, you're just doing the computer to manipulate it, or then the question, has this been manipulated in some way? And as you said, it is a piece of art. This is fine photography, so you can bring all kinds of different elements to it. Right.
And although I'm more of a realist shooter, I really appreciate when people do manipulate the heck out of this thing to make it, something that it's their vision, so that it's their piece of art. Let them do whatever they want. And I have manipulated things, but like I say, when I do a composition or something, I usually call it out so people know that it was like that. And like that Yosemite picture, right back there, you said it looked like a painting, and that one, yes. I did. I tone mapped it, and actually what I was doing was like using a brush and painting over it the way I wanted it to look.
Now explain to me that tone mapping.
Tone mapping is usually the first it's a process involved in high dynamic range. And tone mapping you're adjusting the colors and textures, and you can do it wildly and make it really crazy, or you can do it subtly and make it realistic. I tone mapped it, but I didn't do a high dynamic range. I didn't take it the full length. I just did the tone map. You can take a single photograph, instead of combining them for different exposures in high dynamic range. You can take a single photograph and run it through tone mapping software, and you can bring up the colors and change things to make it look the way you want it to. The particular picture of Yosemite that I shot was all blues and grays, and it lost all of its, all of the browns were gone, everything, because the storm was coming in. And although it looked really dynamic, and I have it as the original, I also wanted to show the colors that were in there, so I tone mapped it and brought it back to what it would look like more on a sunny day, but also dark with the clouds and things. So it changed the whole mood, but everyone that looks at that picture says, it looks like a painting, and actually it is. It's a digital painting. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I imagine we have somewhat gone over time, but we're going to have to wrap this up as quickly as we can. Why don't you tell everybody how they can get in contact with you, and maybe come and visit your studio, and how they can go about doing that?
Well, you can visit me on crosbygallery.com. That's one word. all lowercase, crosbygallery.com. I have 700 or 800 photos on there. I have all my contact information on there, phone number, everything you could want to see and contact me. As far as visiting my studio, obviously this is up in the top of my house. It's in a loft, so not many people get to come up here. But I do show every spring at the Mother's Day, the North Auburn Artist Studios Tour, and that's in my barn, and everyone seems to really enjoy my barn for some reason. They really like it. They comment on that more than the photos. And then luckily I do pretty good business on Mother's Day, and that's a fun day because you don't have to buy anything. You can just tour around and look at all the artists in their own environment, and it's just a fun day for the whole family. So I hope to see you in the spring. That's Mother's Day weekend, NAST, North Auburn Artist Studios Tour.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today.
It's great. Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank the North Auburn artists for supporting Meet the Artist. I always appreciate the time that they give us, including all of their artists that come and meet with us and share their experiences in using their art form. I also want to thank you for tuning in to Meet the Artist by watching it on Auburn Community Television on Wave Channel 20, or possibly finding it on YouTube. Who knows, through this process of watching Meet the Artists on television or on YouTube, you've discovered that there is an artist living just around the corner. Or just possibly, you've discovered the artist within.